Hello, my name is Celina, and I'm a part of the Let's Discuss A Course in Miracles webinar team at the Foundation for Inner Peace. The mission of the foundation is to publish, distribute, and discuss A Course in Miracles. We hold these Let's Discuss online webinars as an expression of our vision of extending love through A Course in Miracles teachings. Today, we're bringing you Remember, Renew, Resurrect. This session is pre-recorded in approximately 90 minutes. We want to thank all those who submitted questions in advance on this topic. We're also happy to announce that simultaneous Spanish translation is available for today's webinar. Attendees can listen to Spanish by selecting the interpretation button in the webinar controls and selecting the Spanish channel. The slide on the screen illustrates how to listen to Spanish language while on the Zoom webinar. Before introducing our guests, I invite you to join in prayer. From the text, chapter 2, A Course in Miracles tells us that we can do much on behalf of our own healing and that of others if we think of our situations in this way. I am here only to be truly helpful. I am here to represent Him who sent me. I do not have to worry about what to say or what to do because He who sent me will direct me. I am content to be wherever He wishes, knowing He goes there with me. I will be healed as I let Him teach me to heal. Now it's time for today's Let's Discuss webinar. A Course in Miracles in Chapter 6 teaches us that your resurrection is your reawakening. But what does that really mean through the lens of the Course? The ego projects death in a myriad of forms, be it relational, emotional, situational, physical, etc. So how do you put an end to our seemingly endless projections of separation and death when the experience of an end of a life or even the end of a relationship can seem so overwhelmingly real? Well, our guests today join us for an insightful discussion on death and renewal, resurrection through right-mindedness, and remembering who we truly are. Without further ado, it's a pleasure to have and welcome our panelists. I'm joined today by Foundation President Tam Morgan and course students, teachers, and authors, Dr. Diane Cirincione Jampolsky, Nanci Reed, and Jack Rome. Hello, everyone. Welcome to you all.
Hello, thanks for having us.
Hi. Thank you, Celina. We are going to start this discussion on, I think, the basis of what is death in terms of A Course in Miracles. I'm going to sum it up. And as I always say, I'm not a Course scholar, but I am a Course practitioner and have been in the Course world for many, many years. And to sum it up, death is actually forgetting that we are one, forgetting that there is no death. It is the egoic separation, whether it's for an instant or for a long-term grieving, or even when the story that I love, another teacher, Adyashanti, of a different tradition, but non-dualistic as well, has a story that I love to say, which is we're sitting in meditation for a half an hour, and for 25 of those minutes, we think about the hamburger we wanted to have for lunch or that we did have for lunch. And then 25 minutes into it, we go, oh my God, I've been wasting my time in meditation all this time. I only have 5 minutes left. And then we punish ourselves in the next few minutes. If I can't believe I wasted my whole meditation talking and thinking about my hamburger, instead of saying and realizing, I just woke up. I just woke up. Let me sit here in that awakened state right now. And so we almost negatively train ourselves to not be in meditation because we've just shamed ourselves about having spent all that time that way. And I didn't really expect to say this as the entree for this discussion, but if we look at awakening as not a final something we do in the grand finale, but a continuing awakening to or remembering who we are, it's a lot easier to move through this process of egoic separation because we can start with the course practice to know and realize that we can keep coming back. And the way we can chart or measure our progress is how soon it takes to come back to remembering. And that's renewal. So I'm going to have a lot of examples of different situations, all the way to our actual experience of what physical death is. But I'd love to open up just this conversation first to our panelists and how you feel about what the Course says about what death is, renewal, resurrection. Diane, go for it.
Well, I've taught a lot about, and I am not a scholar of the Course, but I certainly am a longtime student, practitioner. I've taught a lot about love and fear, and that the biggest fear, the only real fear, is the fear of separation. And from something or someone, no matter what you look at in life, fear arises from the separation of something happening, something not happening, the fear of a death of a loved one, etc., etc. And that idea that you're bringing it back to that ultimate, the remembering and forgetting, separation, to me it's an awareness that I try to hold inside myself. That what am I feeling separate from? Whenever I have a feeling of fear, I said, wait, what am I afraid? Am I afraid of losing my body, my mind, or whatever it is in life? So that, and I think that the Course speaks to that really beautifully.
Jack, how about you?
Sure. Yeah. Well, Tam, first I want to say shout out to Adyashanti. I'm familiar with Adyashanti as well. But I love what you brought up when you described awakening as a process, a happening that's a continuous experience as opposed to a finale. And I think that resonates with me because I think a lot of the times when folks are thinking about awakening, like you said, they think about a finale. And in some ways, to me, that comes across like thinking about it in terms of death, because death to the ego is like the ultimate finale. It's the ultimate, like, sort of like, this is my big presentation where I get to prove that I am an ego, that everything's terrible, that, hell is real, et cetera, et cetera. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone through that, 25 minutes of meditation, not meditating, and had that, yeah, right. Yeah. Or the whole way through, and had that moment where it's, I mean, in many ways I see it, it's the same choose again moment that we always have. And the choose again moment in the form of the meditation is I could choose to hold on to the death that I think happened here, or I could let it go and, like you said, be glad and grateful for the awakening that is happening. And it comes across to me, especially when we think about it in terms of a continuous happening, that it's really about the recognition, not about doing anything, not about making some kind of big death statement saying death is real, this is what's going to happen, and just calling it awakening, which I think it's very tempting to do that. I mean, I've done it so many times thinking, when is my awakening moment going to happen? And basically just substituting that for death, just substituting that for the moment of death. So that resonates with me a lot. And I think I do feel, especially as I've practiced the Course as a student, that choose again moment happens in so many different forms. Just like we talk about, in the description, how death comes in so many forms. Well, every single one of those forms is an opportunity to, well, choose again, as I am trying to do all the time. As you said, it's a process. So yeah, that definitely touched me. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. And Nanci.
Well, so the thing that really spoke to me about what you were saying is how tempting it is to take the ego seriously and to take its interpretation of what death is seriously as well. And so if it was by taking the idea seriously that we also remembered not to laugh, then it's in taking it lighter and in looking without judgment at it, without any denial. That's actually the undoing in our attachment to something specific. And death is specific. It's not experienced abstract as a seeming body. There's a specificity to it, right? And so that lets us know that it's coming from the idea of separation taken seriously, because to have separation, there must be a specific, right? And that instead, when we are undoing that belief in a specific to remember and recall the abstract, then that is actually the undoing of the belief that there is even a specific form of death that could be experienced as the seeming body.
Thank you. That brings into part of the theme of this webinar is forgetting to remember or remembering to forget. What is it that we are forgetting? What is it that we are remembering? I mean, at the end of the workbook, well, near the end of the workbook, and of course it says, now forget this course, forget everything and walk with me. Is that the grand finale of this? It's actually the letting go of all this narrative, all this narrative that we have. And I found it a beautiful moment in watching my mother, who was the founder of the Foundation for Inner Peace and brought the course from Helen, published it to the world. She was very agitated about a month before she passed. And I said, Mom, what's wrong? And she said, well, you know, I've put myself in the slow learners group. I've done the course so many times, year after year. I practice it continually, but I'm still not where I thought I would be. As much as I know, as much as I practice, I still don't feel that state in that presence like I've gotten there. And I, you know, it's like, maybe there are many lifetimes. Who knows what anything is for? Story. And I said, but you sure have spread a lot of love, and it's been a lot of love here. So who's judging what? And you're forgetting your real state. And as she started to pass, she would keep saying, I'm going to go see Whit, who was her last husband, because he had passed, and I'm going to go see your grandma. I'm really excited. And so as she was in her bed passing, I said to her, I read her the chapter, you know, I read her about now forget this course. And I said, Mom, guess what? You're really soon to seeing, you know, Whit and Grandma. And she opened her eyes and she said, no, it's not like that. And I said, really? I was so excited for you, you know? She said, no, all stories disappearing. It's very different. And she was talking about how she'd never felt so peaceful in her life. And I said, so you finally got there. She said, this is it. So that was a grand finale of a sort. But she had many, many, many moments of that throughout. And I could not, and still not to this day, experience her death, because I watched an evanescence. And I had been with many people who'd passed. But with my mother, I watched her, instead of a spirit swoop up or go out, or things that I've projected that I've seen in the past, I had the experience of my mother literally evanescing into love through her pores. And she became part of everything. And that experience made me, certainly in that moment, completely feel what truth is, what one is, what we are. It was such a transcendent moment that to this day, I never shed tears over my mom's passing, because every time I feel love, she's right there. And it's all still here. And I don't know if they're past lives or not past lives, because all of that, if we think it, we create it. It's narrative. It's possible. But this experience of what death is not.
Mm.
And what is not death is what I think I will always remember from watching that death go. Now, there are deaths that seem so real and feel so real because we have a sense of grief over a physical body gone and what we put into that. And then there are times where we create a story of separation. For instance, I had a dear friend who I love tremendously, and the shortest version is his wife was very angry with our friendship. She felt very threatened, even though there was zero reason that I felt that there would be any threat. That it was her threat. And he was going in for surgery to have a bone marrow transplant from his brother. And I called to wish him good luck. And he picked up the phone right before surgery and in the hospital. And he said, "Thank you, but I can never talk to you for as long as I live, because I've agreed with my wife that if I get through this, I'm never going to talk to you again. That's what she needs to keep taking care of me." And I thought, well, that's funny. I only speak to you once a year, maybe anyway, but I hung up and it felt uncomfortable to me. And we didn't talk. And for 3 years, I found I was festering in anger about it. Like, I was such a good friend to him and there was no reason for this. And why would he give in to that? And finally, 3 years later, I did a meditation and I was really heard. Time for forgiveness. Time for forgiveness. So I was talking to my sister about it and I said, I'm going to check in, just see what's going on. And I looked online and he had passed 3 years ago in that surgery. And I did not know that, but then I thought of his words, and he had a lot of sense of humor. And his words were, "I can't talk to you for as long as I live, for the rest of my life," which was about an hour and a half longer. And also, I would have shown up at his funeral had I known, and that would not have been kind to his wife. And all the things that we create as separation, when I did the practice of forgiveness of it, and I found out that he passed after I already forgave, it all unraveled. And that to me is the resurrection. That is the atonement. That is forgiveness. The letting it go, the forgetting, it's all okay. And then suddenly we hear a whole different storyline, even, that can happen over and over again.
Tam, that's beautiful. And you remind me of the beauty of when Judy got the manuscript and then gave the manuscript to Jerry, my husband, Jerry Jampolsky, not then my husband, but my husband and partner of over 40 years, and how it transformed him. He was really scared of dying. He had been an atheist. He was an alcoholic. And when he started the Center for Attitudinal Healing, he was working with children, and many of these children had leukemia, and they were facing death, and 85% of children in those days died of leukemia. And Jerry, now 85% lived. And he was hoping that they would help him get over his own fear of dying. And the course, which were the principles of attitudinal healing, which were based on precepts in the course, gradually healed him in that way. And he had a visualization. I think I've told you this, Tam, but he had a visualization, long before he died, that upon his death, the children were there waiting for him. And I had said to him, I was with him when he died, and I was very peaceful. And I had said to him a few months before, would you like me to say this visualization after your last breath, if I'm able to? I thought I would be pretty calm, and I was. And he said, yes, I would really like that. And the visualization was, he went through it in a sort of a dark and grayish area and going towards light. And when he came out from the light, he looked up, and this is what I was saying to him after I said, Jerry, you took your last breath, and this is what I was saying to him. And he looked up, and there was a spiral got larger and larger, and it was this incredible shade of golden light. And on it were little steps. And on each step was one of the children that he sat with when they died. And there were 34 of them. And he went underneath the spiral, and the kids all looked down. And of course, they called him Jerry because they didn't want them to call him Doctor. They looked down, they went, "Jerry's here." And they reached their hands down, and Jerry reached his hands up, and they lifted him up to the top of the spiral. And then they took him by the hand and walked him into the afterlife. So I said it in that the first person of Jerry experiencing it at the time. And then a year later, in an incredible reading with a very gifted medium, he explained the whole thing. He saw the whole thing, and the medium described it, etc. And it was just a reconfirmation that, yes, that while we miss tremendously the person, that we still can have this knowledge that there is no separation, that we are all deeply connected. And I shared with Tam a little while ago, about 4 hours ago now, my stepson died suddenly. And I was just with him in Mexico at his daughter's wedding. And while he was ill these last 5 days, we didn't expect him to die. And so it's again one of those moments where you can have that. I have the knowledge and the awareness that there is no separation, that I loved completely and totally this man, Greg Jampolsky. And you can know that the person will leave a great void in your life and other people's lives too. But the first thought that I had, the very first thought when his brother, Dr. Lee Jampolsky, called me, was, well, he's with his dad now, and he's with his mom, that they're there to meet him. And so I think we can have this dual experience of the knowledge. And I do have just a deep relationship with this and the afterlife and the transition of it. And I'm at great peace with that. And there's also the human emotional part. And I want to honor both of those. I want to honor family, his daughter who was married this last weekend, married his son, and our family. So I think you can carry both of those experiences at the same time, and one doesn't deny the other. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. My mother always said, don't mix levels. Don't mix.
There you go.
We are here in this experience now that we can wake up within as the witness. It doesn't mean this experience immediately disappears. We wake up as the witness of all that is going on. And there is, when people would come to my mother's apartment, I would find it was ironic because I'd find myself, they'd walk in, they'd burst into tears, and I'd be holding them saying, I'm sorry for your loss. And I wasn't feeling it. And they would kind of laugh and cry, but they'd say, oh, then they'd feel guilty. And I'm sorry, I'm crying and you're not. And I'd say, no, her life was worthy of tears.
Right.
Was worthy of that and this level. I don't feel her gone, so I can't, I can't feel the loss to give her those tears even, but it's all okay. It's not about judging ourselves. The grief even is okay. It's the witness that we are of all of this, and all of this being part of this extraordinarily exquisite experience as showing up as the witness in this, till it all does dissolve. But Nanci and Jack, we've kind of been monopolizing a little here. I invite you in, but interrupt at any given moment. This is informal discussion.
That was amazing. I remember reading, I believe it was from Jerry Jampolsky's book, about that he helped people understand the idea of death after a child spoke to him. Is that correct, Diane? About that library books, like
Oh yeah, the child said that you're well, it's like Jerry asked him what he thought, and there's one in the groups with the children. He said, well, I think it's kind of like you're like a library book in that, when your parents come, they take you out, and then you have them for the life, and when it's your due date, I think that's what it was. Like, it's your
Yeah.
due date, you go back on the other side, and that really helped him a lot.
Yeah, I can see that. I actually had a really good friend, a classmate when I was 10, and his parents had read that book. And so when I was having a really hard time because he wasn't getting better, even though he had all the medicine and everything like that possible, and he looked at me, and so here he is, the guy in the hospital bed with all the needles and all the tubes and everything like that, and he says, "It's okay, Nanci." He said it's sort of like that everybody is a library book, and certain of us, we've been checked out for longer than others, and some of us get renewed and we get to stay a little bit longer and a little bit longer, but we always go back to our library that we're from. And it was very, very, very helpful. And I remember like telling my mother the story about it. And she's like, "Oh, I've read that before," that idea in Dr. Jampolsky's book or something like that. And I was like, "Oh, I've got to find out about this." And so that was one of my first, introductions to some of that. But I was 10. And so I think there definitely are these metaphors that they are beautiful ways to meet ourselves where we believe we are without denial and without judgment. And so that we can fully be here and yet know that we're not of here. And, to go back to Ken Wapnick's story about 2 + 2 really equals 5. And yet we live in this 2 + 2 = 4 world. So we better know all the ways to make 2 + 2 = 4 and be able to talk about it, discuss it, even show maybe like the proofs and the theorems for it. And yet in the back of our mind, with that gentle smile and that softened forehead, we know that 2 + 2 really equals 5. And that means that we don't have to prove to anybody else that it does. They don't need to be any different. They can still be choosing to operate from that 2 + 2 = 4. They're paying their taxes, they're showing up in this world, they're getting sick, they're having, all these other things. And we can still be quote unquote good students of this material, A Course in Miracles, and be meeting people exactly where they are and bringing that lightness rather than that heaviness and forcing. We're able to stay in that place of flow because we know that salvation isn't something that's coming. It's not some linear experience that we're trying to get to. It's actually here right now. We just get to decide when we're willing to take down those barriers to that remembrance without fear.
Oh, that's great. That's great, Nanci. Yeah. It reminds me, the Course talks about the notion of death several hundreds of times. And Jesus' voice says, there is no death, but there's a belief in death, which is what we are all talking about. But listening to all of you share your stories, it has reminded me not only, it's experience of death, but even how we anticipate death and loss in life, and the fear surrounding that, which I know Tam and Diane has touched on. The Course says the emptiness in chapter 1, in the Escape of Darkness, the emptiness engendered by fear must be replaced by forgiveness. So that has been truly, I think, where I have gone to when I think of death. I think of a few years ago, my father died a little more than 5 years ago. And I remember as I saw, and I'm experiencing this now with my mom, who's currently alive, but aging and starting to see some dementia in her. But when my dad was alive, and as I was anticipating, okay, and I saw him get more ill, and wasn't he and I had oftentimes very abrasive relationship, and there were a lot of things between us that weren't communicated, but probably needed to be, and a lot of difficulty. And I remember also feeling a lot of sadness and fear too, as I saw my parents age. And I was probably a more anticipatory grief and experiencing My parents declined than actually when it happened. But what I did at the time, I remember to always come back to that practice of forgiveness. And what does it mean? So it meant for me, like I took a moment, I stepped back, and I remembered that my father, all of us, were really just truly spirit. And we are completely innocent. There's only kindness. I remembered us in truth is really, it's going to the space of non-judgmental awareness. And I had to go again and again and again. And leading up to his death, there was so much that just was resolved, and there was a freedom in our relationship and the way that we felt around each other. I saw it in the way he responded to me, and you could feel it. It was palpable. So, and what was interesting is when he passed, actually, I almost had to laugh because even though I did everything I needed to, and was there for my mom, and I handled all of the, um, everything that you do when someone passes, I handled everything, but I realized, oh my gosh, I feel so at peace. Like I thought it was going to be so much worse. But I used the opportunity as an experience every time something would come up, any fear, any, adversity, anything, any frustration. And I kept going back to that practice again of remembering who we truly are. And that helped me in that experience. I wanted to share with you all.
We have a lot in the course about remembering and forgetting, and I'm just going to read one thing because I'll probably read a few, but it's the Holy Spirit calls you both to remember and to forget. You have chosen to be in a state of opposition in which opposites are possible. As a result, there are choices you must make. In the holy state, the will is free, so that its creative power is unlimited and choice is meaningless. Freedom to choose is the same power as freedom to create, but its application is different. Choosing depends on a split mind. The Holy Spirit is one way of choosing. God did not leave his children comfortless, even though they choose to leave him. The voice they put in their minds was not the voice for his will, for which the Holy Spirit speaks. So here we are, creating our own narratives as all along we are that which we think we're not. And every experience of death, it can include someone walking out the door to get a cup of coffee and you feel left alone, to you leaving yourself at any single second because you're judging yourself or you're projecting something onto your brother, which I will have to add this one passage because I love it so much, because they really do go hand in hand, which is, do not allow your brother not to remember, for his forgetfulness is yours, but your remembering is his, for God cannot be remembered alone. This is what you have forgotten. To perceive the healing of your brother as the healing of yourself is thus the way to remember God. For you forget your brothers with him, and God's answer to your forgetting is but the way to remember. So, I mean, we could stop the webinar there. It does say it all, but I think just for our, I call them practitioners of the course, our course students, I think sometimes the experiences and the experiential of what we have to share is helpful. How do we use these principles and apply them to when we are experiencing separation and death? How do each time we stop, we remember, we listen, we resurrect, and then we experience renewal. And we have the story of Jesus Christ within that, to show that there is no death, then to go through a physical death, to resurrect. It's so, you can see it as a true story. You can see it mythologically. You can see it through a Jungian psychological perspective. Any which way, that story shows that from the extreme, there is no death, there is no body, to even the limited of no matter what's done to us, you can still keep feeling love. You can still stay centered in that place of remembering and experiencing who you are and who we truly are.
Yeah.
So I had a situation just a couple weeks ago, and I'm telling Nanci this because she asked about it, where we had a goose who laid 11 eggs in our planter box. And everyone on the houseboats, I live on a houseboat, was so excited that we had these 11 eggs, and these two geese, the goose, I guess geese mate for life. And these two geese were really two of the most inattentive parents I'd ever seen. They came, they flew off. If the male went off across, the waters and would call the female, even if it was cold and rainy, she'd come to him and they'd hang out in another rowboat or wherever. And, we were all looking like, that parenting is a little strange. And we called them Ken and Barbie because we thought we're going to have a bunch of little Ryan Goslings. And so we had my next door neighbor who's 86, who was completely attached to these geese because she had the perfect view of this goose sitting on the eggs. And she kept coming over saying, have you seen them today? How wonderful. And I would say, yes, it is wonderful. And we talk about how we'd have to have a date later after when the geese were born, the goslings. Anyway, one day I was actually outside and watched these two geese look at the eggs and fly off. And I knew they had left. I knew they had left and abandoned their eggs. I could feel it inside. And a little while later, I found out that close to the exact same time, my next door neighbor had unexpectedly passed. And first there was this feeling of grief was coming over me. And then I ended up having this dream, we'll call it, of my neighbor coming to me. And she came through another goose, like the image of another goose, saying that the eggs were a ruse and that the geese came to give her joy to bring her passage. And she said, sometimes a goose that lays a golden egg is not for birthing. It's for abundance and for blessing and for knowledge. And she said, and then she, in this dream, gave me different things I was supposed to do with each of these eggs, including leaving one out for the raccoons to get and giving one to a neighbor who was over attached to it and painting it gold for her and all these different things. And when I came out of this dream that felt very like a vision, the experience was so different. And she said, remember, it's all a satire. And she had said that many times. She was a writer and she wrote satires, or one in particular. And the whole experience shifted for me completely. And she said some very pertinent things that came true after to make it even feel more real, whatever that means here in this illusion. And she said, I had not found out yet that she had passed when I had this dream. I kind of made the chronology a little different in the story, but I hadn't found out yet. And she said, when you find out, go do this and this and this with the eggs. And I woke up, and within an hour, my partner told me she had passed. So, and I said, yeah, I knew it. And then she did say, there will be renewal. Don't be upset with the geese who took off. And a couple of days later, the geese came back, and they weren't looking for their eggs. They just came back as friends to come visit and play, and they're around. Everyone had a different experience of this. One neighbor was so upset and angry with them, and everyone had a different experience. What does this mean? It means perception is a mirror, not a fact. The only fact is what and who we truly are, and how do we remind ourselves, and how then could I take this beautiful dream that I was given and this gift and share it with the neighbors who are feeling anger, feeling anything that they were uncomfortable feeling, to give them a different perspective of a story to bring about healing, using that which is in this world as this narrative to remember, remind, and bring us back to what feels true. So that's my answer to you, Nanci, that I said I would let you know about. But
I'm so glad I asked you about that, because that was incredible, Tam. That was so beautiful, and that's a great reminder for us that the hatched egg or the unhatched egg, it's actually the same, right?
She also said that she said
good.
mothers don't women, females, whatever, don't always need to have children to fulfill their complete experience. Like, we're all like, sit on those eggs, lady. You know, do your job. And in this vision, her job was to be there to bring joy to my neighbor and to exit with her.
But it really brings up that, you mentioned the perception is a mirror, not a fact. I can't tell you how many times I've used that myself. So I look at the world, and if a judgment starts to creep in like this, woulda, coulda, shoulda, be a different way, I go, wait. It means nothing. Your thought means nothing. It's just like, it's just what you're perceiving. And then what do you, choose once again? Which I remember Bill saying how much he loved that section. And I have loved it also, as many of us have. But to choose once again, not to deny, but to know that I have choices about the way I perceive, and that even if I perceive in a way that is, less than or what it could be, to love myself through it, because it really doesn't make any difference. All that's made up. And so it's about how do we love ourselves through this journey, wherever we are, and with the tools of many of the traditions, including A Course in Miracles. It's that we have tools that can awaken us in a moment and go, wait, I can see differently. I can choose to see. When Jerry and I, in 1982, we went into San Francisco to find out what this thing called HIV/AIDS was, because it just got named. So we went to San Francisco General and met young doctors. Dr. Volberding was 33 years old. And there were 6 healthcare workers and 100 patients. And we went, what is this? We didn't know how you got it. Nobody knew any. And it was, everybody was getting really frightened about it. And I remember us thinking, whatever this is going to be an amazing journey for people with all of their fears of death, of fears of the other, people who are different than them, people making choices, how people get it. Are you giving it to me? All this. And it was such an unbelievable opportunity. We worked for 10 years in 30 countries doing education. And it was always about learning ourselves. And it was all watching the different perceptions we have and never having a script for how somebody else should perceive, how they should think, how they should be, know what it could have, should have. So that was our journey, is to always let go of our own judgments about how we thought somebody could be, etc., etc. I remember Jerry and I were in Hawaii. We lived there off and on throughout our entire 4 decades together. And we were doing a workshop, and this little Japanese lady, her name was Minnie. She was really tiny, and she stood up, and her son had died, and not that long ago. Well, actually, it was 2 years. And in the Japanese tradition, she was expecting him to take care of her, etc., etc. And the therapist, after 2 years, said, Minnie, I think you've been mourning, enough. It's time for you to stop and get on with your life. And she was just bawling, crying. So Jerry is very clever. He pulled out a pad out of his pocket, and he had a pen. He says, I'm a doctor, right? Right, Minnie? She goes, yeah. He said, I can write prescriptions, right? Yes. So Jerry says, I'm going to write you a prescription. You can cry as long as you want, as much as you want for the rest of your life. And he wrote it out and he gave it to her. And she went, oh, okay, thank you. It's like she just needed permission to be in the human form of who she was. And she went on to become part of the center there, et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's somehow giving each other permission to just be who we are. It doesn't mean that that's all we are. It just means who we're being at the moment, how we're acting out at the moment. And I think that I love the part of the course that I think you alluded to before, Tam, that, forget this course. When I read that, I went, oh man, I love this course. I am so glad it says forget it. To me, it meant forget all of the words and the chatter and live it. To live it. I can forget it when I'm living it. And I can pull out parts of it and make that a part of me. But it's such a gentle course.
And when you say we have to remember to love ourselves throughout, and that is true on one level, and then we need to remember we are that love.
The essence of our being is love, the very first principle of attitudinal healing. Jerry took this out, generically in the world, and I helped a little bit. And the essence of our being is love. The essence of our being is love, the very first one. And people read that, and no matter what tradition they are, because we work in over 60 countries, and it didn't matter what the culture was. It was like, hi, is the essence of my being love? Yeah, actually is. It's powerful.
Yeah. And I loved how you said, Diane, earlier too. So just allow the person to be who they were at the time. Not that's not who they are fully or truly. That's not all of them, but who they were, who they felt like they had to express at that moment. I thought that was really powerful.
Tam has also worked with a lot of people that are dying, and we have our whole lives together. And people say, how could you work with kids who are dying? It's like overwhelming. I said, I think it's because we remember who they really are.
Yeah. And they remind us. I mean, I started when I was 16 years old, 16, 17, working with catastrophically ill children. And I remember I was guileless, and I would say, why are you dying? Why are you doing this? And it was the hard thing for a grown-up to ask, but I was 16 and looked super young. For 16, I looked like 10. And I got so many different answers that were extraordinary. One little girl who had leukemia said, I'm doing this because I came to teach my mother how to pay attention to someone else. And I said, what does that mean? And she said, my mother never took care of me, but when I got sick, she had to take care of me. And that was the lesson I had to bring to her. So she's doing such a good job. It's time for me to go now. And, these things for me to hear at age 16 and 17 were completely mind-blowing. In so many different ways, gave me a different perspective. And people would always say, how can you work with catastrophically ill children? It's because they have such amazing messages when you start to ask, when you really ask, what is this for? There are things to be heard. And that is a really important question. I mean, I have heard not a lot, but enough criticisms about my picture, which is with this finger up here, and there's a question mark. And people say, why are you giving us the middle finger? And I said, no, it reminds me, it's not WTF in that sense. It's what is this for? That's my WTF throughout this world, throughout this illusion. What is this for? And the joke is always on us, because we will hear something usually quite different than what we thought. And it always brings us back to love and some humor, that the joke is on us. So these moments of death, these recurring moments of death that we have throughout our lives, are gifts. And I'd like to say this, and you can tell me if I'm articulating it right, but our experience of death is not what death is. And I'm going to bring us into something, and I'm going to use my partner, unfortunately, without his permission here, that he had a daughter who passed at age 3, and it was horrible for him, and really horrible, of course. And years later, and a lot of things in his life he did around the experience of, he had his brother pass when he was young. He got killed in a motorcycle accident, car accident, and different things calcified him, my partner. And he was trying to release it. He couldn't. And he ended up having a reading. People can believe this or not, but his daughter came through, and by name, by everything, and said, your experience, the irony is, she didn't use the word irony, but the irony is your experience of death is not what death is. I'm still here. I'm still here. My arms are wrapped around you. I've never left you. But your egoic experience of death is so much worse than what it really is. And you need to remember that. You made a false assumption of what death means according to your own loss. And your loss is what death is. And if you can change that experience, I'm still here. And that was my experience with my mother. But I found that to be exceptionally profound and very course-like. And Kenneth Wapnick, when he was going, and it was so obvious he was going, he kept saying, I'm not dying. I'm not dying. And I remember looking at my mother saying, does he really think that? And we both discussed it because he was so obstinate about it. And there was a lot of people who just absolutely jumped to knowing he knew he wasn't. And that's what he taught all along. He was not dead. So how could he be dying? His body might be leaving, but he was not dying. And he did not. I mean, in so many ways, we can say it metaphorically, but I believe through understanding the Course, it's even literal.
Yeah.
Just our egoic experience that creates that death is the most horrible thing we should be afraid of, because that's its job, the ego's job. Our job, if we choose it to be our job, if that's our life path, is to say, nice story, ego. That was a really funny movie. You got my attention in a million different ways, but it's just a movie and it didn't happen. It never happened. None of this happened. And so I was very moved by this story.
I love how you said it's a movie, because that really is what it is. It's just a movie the mind is playing. We're like watching this narrative out on the screen. And it's crazy to think about it that way, but it really is. I've had some insight in recent years where I had dreams where it's showed me that like it's really just a trick. It's, we take it very, very seriously. And we experience it. We can't deny that for sure. But it's really amazing how it's just a narrative that we're looking at and we're believing in.
And when we go to a movie, I don't know about anyone else, but if it's a good movie, I get so involved. I'm crying, I'm laughing, I'm tense. And because you believe it while you're in the movie, if it's a bad movie, or depending upon how involved you are, you don't usually sit as the witness going, oh, that actor's doing a good job. No, then you're out of the movie. And we go to movies for entertainment because it helps us forget the rest of our life. So it's almost an iterative, if that's the word, of what we do in our life, that we enact our lives and we try and make it so real because it's actually entertaining in this egoic sense. And when the witness is there, and that witness it's like, I used to go out with guys who were really a pain in the butt for me. It was a lot of work and they were whatever I wanted to project on them. And one day I realized, I always thought it was boring to go out with someone who was more together and less disrupted in their being, or less of me perceiving that, of them at least. And that helped me shift so much that what I thought was interesting was drama. And my life will always be dramatic. It seems that that's on some funny little star path I'm in, but my attachment to it is to let go of the death within the drama, so that I enter more and more the happy state. The illusion isn't gone, it's here. There's still people dying, still horrible things that seem like they're happening. But in my separation to be the witness, it's like now I am watching a movie more and more, going, wow, good actor. Wow, good moment. Wow, spirit, you sure pulled that one out of the hat. And it's different. And I'm not dissociative. That's a really different thing. I've been dissociative before. I'm just more in alignment with witnessing. And that does bring an extraordinary amount of peace. And there are many of us who find peace boring. They're usually not attracted to the course, who basically teaches how to get to peace. Yeah. And it is a choice. It really is a choice. A lot of people want to believe in fear. I mean, truly want to. And the choice of course students is kind of a unanimous, like to believe in love and experience love instead. And my ex sent out something, and I'm going to completely botch it, but it was, I'd like to believe in the conspiracy theory where we all love each other and where everything is great. And I laughed. It's like, yeah, that's the one I'm believing in.
Jack, I'd love to hear from you. We've been talking away. And
sure. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for sharing your experiences. It feels like as I've heard more, it only confirms what I was kind of feeling within me, which sort of when I think about what it really is like practically to, like, it not necessarily like one situation versus another, but just practically to be experiencing the teachings of the course and to be practicing, whether it's a sentence from the main text or the workbook, or letting the whole thing go and just kind of sitting with the witness. And folks in my life, I'm relatively new to the course, only like a year and a half, 2 years. And when they ask me about what it's like and sort of are getting at like, why am I doing this? A word I haven't heard yet, but that I think is related to that shift is recontextualizing. That so much is recontextualized. And I have like a quote here about forgiveness. Forgiveness sits still and quietly does nothing. It merely looks and waits and judges not. And it's, when I accept that forgiveness, when I have that little willingness, show up with that, and choose again, so to speak, to use all the little terms we have, it's like that recontextualization happens on its own. And then a lot of like what you were saying, it felt like you were describing all this recontextualization that was happening. And it happens when that shift happens, but the shift is like our decision. And then the recontextualization is sort of the Holy Spirit's responsibility. The Holy Spirit then recontextualizes everything for us, and everything is fresh. It has this fresh renewal sort of feeling to it. That at times in my life, I look around and I'm looking at everything. I'm like, whoa, almost like I'm looking at this incredible painting, and I'm looking at, how did this person paint this thing? And that to me is what is so powerful, because even if then I, just like we were talking about with like, or what much earlier on with meditation, where you might go a while and totally be sidetracked by the ego and just like on the ping pong back and forth in the pinball machine. At least for me, when I come out of that and I'm present once again, there's this sense of grief. It's the same grief that when we originally separated from God, asking that what if question, that grief shows up again. And if forgiveness sits still and quietly does nothing, merely looks and waits and judges not, forgiveness or the Holy Spirit has nothing to say about the fact that I forgot. It's just like, oh, so glad you remembered. That's all that it's saying there. And so even you can see how even in like meditation, which this is an everyday thing for me, that thing of that moment of just that willingness I have to say, what would the Holy Spirit say about this, sort of? And saying, so glad you remembered. It recontextualizes my entire meditation, because then the whole meditation was just like me playing a little game, stalling before the love that is, that's rightfully ours, that is totally here always. I have tons of sticky notes in here of reminders for myself, but another one I have is related to this, that recontextualizes forgetting, which forgetting is just a way to remember. And that, comes directly from the course. And at least I'll say for myself as a student who, definitely it was what you might call a spiritual practitioner before I came to the course. So I was fairly receptive to it. But that was the thing that my sort of like spiritual ego was having so much difficulty with. I would feel so guilty about, oh, now I said I'm going to go like the spiritual path. Now I'm going to try to get back to God. Now I'm going to try to do all these things, and I'm still forgetting. And somehow my ego found a way to make myself feel even more guilty. Like, you're supposed to know that it's just a movie and you're getting caught up in it again. And sure enough, the Holy Spirit's there, just as forgiveness says, not doing anything. And it's like, you didn't have to do anything. Like, we're just glad you're remembered again. And that's all you got to do. And it totally just like dissolves all of the guilt about it, the guilt about, am I doing this? Supposed to be on this path. No, I'm not supposed to do anything. Like, it's all just, fun and games. So that recontextualization, like when everything in one's life as the ego then gets used by the Holy Spirit to bring us back into union, back into oneness, back to God. It's the kind of thing where it doesn't make me feel like I really did go astray thinking, in all these dreams, in a sense, maybe from the ego's perspective, it's like feels guilty about it. It's like, yeah, I went so astray. I did all these terrible things. I forgot you. But I never really left ever. And I think that recontextualization, every time I remember that, it just like fills me with joy. And then I can just relax. My body stops shaking. I stop, thinking about all these things. And it kind of like all the different pieces of me in the ego's head just kind of come together like this. And it's just like one clear presence, or, the holy instant, you might say.
Okay.
Thank you. You had something to say.
I loved how he talked about it in terms of recontextualization. That's the first time I've ever heard anyone describe it like that, but it's so true.
Those words are they're powerful words like that. I remember the first time I heard the word intentionality. It wasn't really written in the dictionary then, but it was Mother Teresa that told Jerry's Tamino's mother. Jerry and I traveled with Mother and did work with Mother Teresa. And we said to her, how can you be like this way all the time, right? Yeah. And then she said, she looked up at Jerry. She was very tiny. She goes, Dr. Jerry. She goes, nobody's this way all the time. And we went, good. Okay. And then she said, it's your intentionality of going in that direction. And that, I tell you, that changed me completely. That's the moment where I realized, Jackie, I don't have to be that way all the time. I want to it's my intention, and my intention is pure. And, we're talking about forgiveness. And of course, the message of Jesus of Nazareth, the power of forgiveness that, came out into the open as part of a possibility of being. I remember the hardest lesson that I had in my life. And it was about, I'm guessing like 15, 18 years ago, when Al-Qaeda was doing some really pretty horrific things in the Middle East. And they were so brutal that they were shocking to, the mind that had never seen these things. And I remember seeing a picture in, I think it was the New York Times, and there was a picture of an Al-Qaeda soldier holding by the hair, a journalist, and had his machete, and he was going to cut his head off, which he ultimately did. This was the photograph of it. And I was so mortified when I looked at it. It just chilled everything inside of me. And I pulled it out of the paper, and it was on my desk, and I went, oh my God, I'm going to have to transform the way I look at that picture if I'm going to be healed. So I cut out the picture and I tape it up in front of my desk. And every single day I would look at it and try and see it differently. And I day after day couldn't see it differently, but my intention was to see it differently. And finally, there's one of those moments in life that you never forget. Finally, one day I sat at my desk, and I had Jerry and I do the course every day. We would read it in the morning, the section of it together. And I came over to my desk, and I sat and I looked up at the picture. And instead of the soldier having a machete cutting off the head of the journalist, the soldier transformed into a picture of the risen Christ with his hands just coming up. And I knew I had been healed because I could see him differently, past the costume that he wore in this world, past my fears, past my projections, to see him as truly the holy being of God. And it was so powerful. I was so grateful to the image. And it showed me that if my intentionality is strong enough and pure enough, it may not happen in a moment, because I try to never use denial, although sometimes I probably do, I guess. I try not to, that I can choose once again to see differently, to see with different eyes. And it was one of the most transformative moments of my life to say that. Because mother used to say, Mother Teresa said, when she worked with the lepers, etc., she saw Jesus in everyone. And that's how she was able to move around the world the way she did. She was one of the most powerful human beings I've ever met. And she was in this tiny little body, like this sweet little nun. No, that was not the woman. She was powerful and strong and clear. She was clear what she was seeing. And I wanted to share that with you.
Wow. Now that's right-mindedness. If anyone had a question about right-mindedness, that's a great depiction.
Yeah, it took a while, but I mean, time is made up anyway.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
It's I say to my clients often, I said, look, life can be over in a minute. And that's what I experienced this morning, with my son. And so live every minute with your fullest intention and your fullest possible love. And don't judge yourself. Just be kind to yourself as you're going through the journey. And it'll be okay. We remember, we forget. Life is about remembering and about forgetting and about remembering again who we are and who everyone else is. Not just us, but who everyone else is.
So beautiful.
And that reminds me of my interpretation of what right-mindedness is, which is that when we're in our wrong mind, that we're not judging, and that we are aware that there is another choice, but that we're not condemning ourselves for making that other choice. And so in that instant, if you see yourself as only having like one hand that you can hold on to at any one time, so you're either all in with that ego or you're all in with the Holy Spirit. And it's almost like that you choose what lens you're wearing, like contact lenses, eyeglasses, whatever you want to say. And so you either can have the ego lens or you can have the Holy Spirit. You can't have one of each. So when you recognize that you are perceiving with the ego's interpretation, even if it's something like that you're wanting to, get over something, or you're trying to be a good student of this material or anything like that, when you can look at that resistance without judgment, but instead with gentleness, and really with that space of curiosity, then what you're doing in that moment is you're not taking the ego seriously. So you're not giving that separation life. You're actually going back to that space that's saying that, again, salvation isn't something that's coming. It's not dependent upon my brain understanding things on a certain level or at a certain linearity of time, that it's instead about meeting myself where I believe I am in time, but also remembering that timelessness that actually exists. And so that the healing is already done, that it's not something that I need to be waiting for or that I need to be pushing somebody else to get to, that the healing is in the remembrance that there is no separation and that we are together as one or not at all. And that includes inanimate objects too. And that's past, present, and seeming future. Everything is included and nothing is excluded. And that's real kindness. That's that real expression of taking a specific form that the ego has wanted us to believe is love, and to instead undo our attachment to it and to invite that remembrance of the abstract real essence where there is no alternative and there is no opposite of real love.
Beautifully put. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you. Well, I think I'm going to start our closing of this with yet another course quote, because it holds it all so beautiful, which is, oh, I hope I haven't read that one. Tell me if I have, if it sounds familiar. I have three
We
and
can
I
hear
know
it again. We can hear it again.
Yeah.
Learning is impossible without memory, since it must be considered consistent to be remembered. That is why the Holy Spirit's teaching is a lesson in remembering. I said before that he teaches remembering and forgetting, but the forgetting is only to make the remembering consistent. You forget in order to remember better. You will not understand his translations while you listen to two ways of interpreting them. Therefore, you must forget or relinquish one to understand the other. This is the only way you can learn consistency so that you can finally be consistent. And there it is, the whole process, how we achieve that state in a kind of more consistent way is through exactly that which we've been talking about. So thank you for all the perspectives on it and the examples. And if anyone has some last statements, words, experiences to share.
Something we did last month, Tam, which I thought was beautiful, is, do you know where I'm
I was
okay.
just, yeah.
Good.
I was just about to add in for a couple of minutes, Celina.
Two. Yeah.
For 2 minutes, an experience of this remembering, and for us to take a moment and close our eyes and really go in. If you're thinking about the hamburger, enjoy it. You'll wake up from it sooner or later. And remember that we're here to really remember who we are. And in that, I would like to say to join with Diane for her stepson, Greg, who passed, to really be in one with that feeling that we are all love, and he's been a part of that with us, and on every level to send that, to feel that, to be that, and to remember. as we gently come back, hoping that we're each experiencing love. I say thank you for joining us, and certainly feeling love for each of you and anyone who has joined this webinar and extending out way further than that, as we're one in that state together. Really appreciate that. And when death comes, it will come, but remember this throughout it. And that is our remembrance and our renewal and our rebirth.
Thank you. So we want to thank our guests, and all of you, our attendees, for joining us, as well as our team, the foundation staff, and all our volunteers who are helping us with this webinar. We, of course, want to give our appreciation to all those who donate to the Let's Discuss webinar series. It's really your donations that keep these events coming, so we certainly thank you for them. Before we go, we have just a couple of announcements. And if you're here with us watching this live or watching it as a direct replay, just keep an eye on our group chat and we will post some of the information there. For those who may not yet know, the ACIM audio app is now here and available for iPhone. You can experience A Course in Miracles like never before and listen to the course at your own pace. We have read-along background music, comprehension breaks. You can even meditate the course passages and do more. And actually, we even recently added a personal recorder button, which is one of Tam's favorites. So the foundation made an official announcement last week. Feel free to learn more about it at acim.org/audio app. And just so you all know, Android version for ACIM audio app will be coming later this year. Before we go, we've created a short survey that will display on our browser when the session ends. So please give us your feedback for today's session. Thank you so much. With love and gratitude, we so appreciate you being here and look forward to having you again soon. Be well and take care.